morning. I wanted to, before I get to the message today, I wanted to make a quick plug, kind of another announcement. We are, some of you remember Jonathan Foster, who has preached here a couple of times. Many of you know Calvin Arsinia and myself. We're starting a new series. It's going to be monthly on Monday nights called Dirty Dogma. Dirty Dogma. And the reason why we named it that is because we're featuring either theologians or philosophers who aren't bound to what we might call a rigid, dogmatic set of beliefs, but definitely more open and especially rooted in radical love. And so Casey Sigmund is going to be kicking us off tomorrow night. We're going to be meeting at Calvin's Greenwood Social Hall. Check that out. That's his sort of music artist concert venue. And we'll be starting at 6:30 tomorrow night. Casey Sigmund grew up, or kind of came to Christ in a very fundamentalist environment. And then while she was in seminary, moved into more thought around open relational process thinking. She's going to kind of share her journey and talk about a mama bear God. Mama bear God. And so she's going to be sharing tomorrow. And it's really, she'll share a little bit, but it's really based on discussion. We'll have drinks. It's a casual environment. And we'd really love for you to come on out there and join us. That'll be a monthly thing. Casey Sigmund is now the professor of preaching and creative worship at St. Paul's Seminary here in Kansas City. And her husband is a hospice chaplain and serves with Sam Gallegos. They're both hospice chaplains here in Kansas City. And so, it'll be a fun night of nerdy, outside-the-box theology, philosophy rooted in radical love. Is that a good enough teaser? All right. Hope to see you. So we're starting a new series. I'm calling it Flourishing in Community on the book of Ephesians. And this is one of the letters that Paul wrote to churches that he had actually founded. The earliest New Testament book is most likely Galatians, written by the Apostle Paul. It was written in about 48 AD, which if you think about Jesus' death, it was written about 15 years after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, okay? So Paul went on 3 different missionary journeys and then wound up in prison in Rome under probably the Neronian persecution right about there. The book of Ephesians it's a letter. We call it a book, but it's actually a letter, and it was intended to be a circular letter to the churches in and around Ephesus. And Ephesus is in western Turkey, modern-day Turkey, and there would have been about 13 churches in that part of the world, western Turkey. Most of those would have been founded on the first missionary or second missionary journey that Paul took. And probably about 13 churches, and when you think about churches, I'm curious what you think. When you hear the word church, what do you think? And especially because if you think about those churches that Paul wrote to back at the end of the 50s, early 60s AD, somewhere in that time frame, when he probably wrote this from prison to these churches, 13 or so of them. What do you think of when you think of church, both today and in Paul's day? What do you think about when you think of church? Sunday. All right, something that happens on Sunday. You know, Paul would have been used to celebrating Sabbath on Saturday, right? But some of the early followers of Jesus after the resurrection on Sunday moved their day of worship to Sunday. What's fascinating is, like, if you go to Jerusalem today, it's very evident. Like on Friday, that's holy day for the Muslim community. So all the Muslim businesses shut down on Friday in Jerusalem. Saturday, all the Jewish businesses shut down, and Sunday, all the Christian businesses shut down, right? So it's kind of like a 3-day weekend, holidays, and then back to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, all right? But yeah, so Sunday certainly would be a church day around the world since the early days of the first churches. What else do you think of when you think of church? Gathering, okay, good. What, somebody said something else? Underground. Oh, yeah, so during the early persecution days, many of the churches went underground for sure, so yeah. What else? Okay, time of worship. Other thoughts? Community, breaking bread. Say what else? Oh, a statement. Okay, definitely making a statement to the communities we're in, to the world around us, for sure. What else? Yeah, how many think of buildings when you think of churches? Yeah, I mean, in America, we're going to be celebrating 250 years. If you go on back to the East Coast, you'll find some of the oldest churches in America. But if you head to Europe, I mean, you find churches that are 1,000 years old or older. I remember preaching in Basel, Switzerland, at one of the Reformed state churches. In the morning, they would have a small crowd, and then in the evening, a new church was starting, reaching kind of a younger crowd. And in this 1,000-year-old building that was there during the Black Plague, they would set up a band and do a worship service at night. And I preached down there, and it was just fascinating to stand in this huge cathedral, downtown Basel, Switzerland, and preach to a bunch of Swiss young people. It was so cool. But yeah, I've traveled around Europe to cathedrals that are just massive. And, if you're a pastor for a long time in a cathedral, they just bury you underneath everybody in the church. So if I'm here long enough, who knows, Be just walking on Fred down here or something. Laura Guy and Fred and who else, Anyway, so yeah. But a church really is people. It's not a building so much as it is the people in the building and the community that is built, the relationships that are built in that community. The Greek word for church is ekklesia, and that actually was translated when they did from the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew word for community or gathering is kahal. So it's interesting, one of the books in the Hebrew Bible is called Ecclesiastes. That's actually from the Greek word ekklesia, which means gathering or community. And then Paul used that for the word ekklesia to mean church. It gets translated church, but it's really a gathering or community. The Hebrew name for ekklesia is kohelet. So it's got the kahal word in there. And it's actually translated in the King James, the preacher. If you read Ecclesiastes, it's translated the preacher. But actually, kohelet is really the person who convenes the gathering, okay? So it's just a gathering of people for a given purpose. It could have been any number of purposes where you gather a group of people together in community to do something, right? And it might be to do good in the world or to bring recovery or hope or healing or redemption. And so that's really at the root of what the church is all about. It's a gathering of people who gather around Jesus and become a community of hope and healing and peace and love and grace and beauty and creativity and service to the world and to the community around us. So it's a mobile sanctuary, if you will, right? Church. I started a church back in 1990, and I moved back here to Kansas City, and I knocked on about 10,000 doors in this whole Northland community, and started these little Bible study groups that had maybe 5, 10 people in a group. The 13 churches that Paul wrote this letter of Ephesians to probably numbered somewhere between 5 and 20 people meeting in homes. So if you think about, just the number of people that are here today, this is probably about twice as many people as the largest church that Paul was writing to when he wrote this book of Ephesians. When you travel over there and you go into these great cathedrals and they seat hundreds, if not 1,000 people, sometimes you can think that this church is this huge thing, but these were small groups of people meeting in homes, gathering together, and radically loving and accepting, because Jews and Gentiles did not even eat together. But you remember, Jesus ate with outcasts and sinners and outsiders and all of that. And so Paul picked that up and was very, very diligent to try to be radically inclusive in terms of Jews and Gentiles when it comes to meeting in these communities, all rooted in grace and love and peace. So when I was starting this church, we were really trying to reach people totally outside the church, okay? I wasn't trying to reach people in other churches. I wasn't trying to reshuffle the church deck. We were really trying to reach out. And we started a rock and roll service, like loud rock, 9,500 decibel rock in a middle school. And if you'd have come to that church in the 90s, about every guy in the church looked like he'd stepped out of a heavy metal band. He was long hair down to here. Like if you were a guy and didn't have long hair like that, you'd have felt out of place. Yeah, so it was fascinating, and we were reaching people. I could write a comedy book and title it "As the Church Turns." For all you old soap opera fans, I call it "As the Church Turns." I remember one Sunday, I heard a bunch of commotion out in the foyer, and there were all kinds of kids just like going crazy, kind of like shouting and stuff like this. And I thought, what in the world's going on? If we had 100 people in those days, 50 of them were kids, okay? It was crazy. And I heard all this shouting out there, and I thought, what in the heck's going on? I walk out into the foyer, and one of the gals from our church was holding a monkey. And it had diapers on. And the children person running the children's ministry kind of had this startled face. And she comes out to me, Fred, she tried to check the monkey into the nursery. Like, this is true. Like, I'm not making this up. And the kids were just so excited to have a monkey at church. I mean, think about it. If we had a monkey every Sunday, I bet you we're going to eventually grow this children's ministry here, by the way. We're putting plans together, right? Yeah, so I walk up and I was like, Kimberly, you brought a monkey to church. It's just like, what do you say? She's like, yeah, isn't it cute? And I said, yeah, it's adorable. My mind's going like, where did you get it? Like, you can't legally go down to the pet store and buy a monkey. Just so you know. This is like black market kind of purchases. Yeah. And so I was going, yeah, it's really cute, Kimberly, but we can't have monkeys in church. We could dig in it. If we want to use it as a metaphor or something, I don't know, who knows what. But like real monkeys, can't have monkeys in church. And she says, because we could baptize it. You know, never know. But anyway, I had her take the monkey home, and yeah, she lived to see another day. And we didn't start an outreach to monkeys, but it was a really cute monkey. And have you ever seen a monkey in diapers before? Yeah, well, come to church. Never know. Never know what's going to happen in church, right? But you know, there's a part of me that just loves that story. Why? Because I think Jesus was all about reaching people who were maybe not quite mainstream, right? And these churches are about grace and peace and love. Those are the three main words that cycle through the book of Ephesians over and over and over again. So today, I titled this message, Temples of Spirit-Filled Grace. Temples of Spirit-Filled Grace. And let me give you just a couple of quick thoughts here. One, this whole first chapter of Ephesians is really just a long prayer of about 5 Greek sentences. Like if you go back to the Greek, there's just 5 sentences, very long. Greek sentences can be super long, right? And there's just 5 sentences, and it's just a long, long prayer. And if you dive into the background of the prayer, you'll see that it's very much rooted in the prayers of the Hebrew Bible, which was Jesus' Bible, right? And so one of the prayers that we're going to see in the book of Ephesians is about defeating the powers of darkness. Ephesians 6 in particular is going to talk about that. And that comes out of Psalms 110. So some of the prayers that Paul prays in the book of Ephesians, rooted in Psalm 110. Some of the prayers Paul's talking about is how God, through Jesus, the Messiah, is rescuing people. And what's interesting is that Paul dives back into the imagery and the metaphors of the Hebrew Bible and begins to see Jesus very similar to Matthew's gospel as the new Moses, the new Exodus, the new Torah. Remember Moses coming out of Egypt, leading the people out, go to Sinai, the mountain, and receive the new Torah, the Word of God. And then they travel, and do you remember how they traveled through the wilderness and what they followed in the wilderness? It was the cloud, and do you remember they were instructed to build a thing called the tabernacle, which in it had the Ark of the Covenant. Do you remember this? And inside, and there was the angels up on top, and then inside they had the 10 Commandments and the Aaron's rod and the manna, okay? And they built kind of like a mobile sanctuary that they carried around on poles all through the wilderness. And basically what that was represented was God's presence through the Spirit in this mobile tabernacle community. Later on, David and Solomon built a temple in Jerusalem, and then later on that temple was destroyed. And so it's almost like Paul picks back up on the theme of tabernacle again and begins to say, hey, you guys are the new community formed by Jesus the Messiah. Your bodies are a temple of the Spirit. Your body is a mobile tabernacle. Did you ever think about it that way? And then the communities that we form around Jesus are like mobile tabernacles. We're not just stuck here in a building. Everywhere we go, we're bringing the love, of grace, the peace of God in Jesus Christ. We're mobile tabernacles. We're moving all around the city and the world. But we're presenced by the Spirit of grace. Paul even begins to reimagine like the Exodus. Think about the Exodus for a moment. Did the people move into slavery because of their own sin or because of the corruption of Pharaoh and his desire to conquer and oppress a certain group of people? Think about Exodus as oppressive systems sinning against people. Have any of you been wounded and hurt by people who have sinned against you? or systems of oppression that have worked against you. Well, a part of the way Jesus rescues us is to bring healing and redemption to the brokenness of the systems and the people that have hurt and wounded and sinned against us, right? The other huge story in the Hebrew Bible after Exodus is exile. Exile. And if you remember, in exile, this was the Babylonian exile, right? So if you think about it, there was no king of Israel, just God led them, right? But then they wanted a king, so they finally got a king. Who was the first king of Israel? Saul. Who was the second king? David. Who was the third king? Solomon. That was when Israel was united. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom split between his two sons. There was a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was carried off into captivity in 722 BC by the Assyrians, and then the southern kingdom was carried off into captivity by the Babylonians in 587 BC. Now, if you read the prophets, do you know of all the kings that served from Saul, David, Solomon, all the way down to the last king that went into the Babylonian captivity, do you know how many of them were good kings? Almost none. I mean, out of 100 or so kings, they were almost all bad kings. They were Jewish bad kings. And do you know what the prophets spoke against those kings about? One is they led people into idolatry. Two, they oppressed the poor and the widow and the orphan and the outcast and the stranger and all of that. So the big indictment of these kings was how they oppressed the poor and how they only cared about their own power. And so in exile, the people went into exile because of their own sin and the own consequences of that. That's another kind of redemption. How many of you have ever done something to hurt yourself or hurt other people? What's interesting is that sometimes we overemphasize the exile motif and we underemphasize the Exodus motif. All of human history and even family history and community history has woundings a part of it, right? How many of you have ever been hurt or wounded in a family or in a workplace or with friends or in a community or with loved ones, you know? So these communities are not supposed to be communities of judgment. We're supposed to be communities of grace, love, peace, healing. We're to be mobile temples, on the move, tabernacles, if you will, of God's grace and love. So we're going to be diving into these communities of love and grace here over the next several things. N.T. Wright's book, which if you can stay after, I encourage you to do so. Greg's going to be leading a Bible study on Ephesians. This is N.T. Wright. He's one of my favorite theologians. Tom is his name, Tom Wright. And this is his newest commentary. It just came out a few months ago. I'm hoping to get him on my podcast and talk about this book. His thesis is that the theme of Ephesians is that the church is a small working model of new creations in and around Jesus. And communities that are mobile tabernacles disseminating love and grace and peace. So we're going to be diving into this beautiful grace of God. How many of you love to receive grace? Don't you like it when you get an undeserved gift and it's love? It's all wrapped up in beauty and grace and love and acceptance and forgiveness. You know, some of us have put ourselves into exile. We've sinned against ourselves and other people. And isn't it beautiful to find out that there's forgiveness and grace and mercy in Jesus? And then there's those who have been hurt and wounded by others, who have been hurt and wounded by systems. And isn't it beautiful to find out that we can heal together, we can grow together, We can find freedom together, and we can move out into the community and the world around us and bring that love and justice and peace and goodness and begin to fight against injustice, fight against the powers of evil, and do it through love and grace, even loving our enemies. And so this is the vision that we're going to be unwrapping as the Apostle Paul begins to dive into these beautiful themes of the Hebrew Bible and see how in Jesus, grace and peace and love are wrapped up in community. You know, in the recovery community that I've been a part of for almost 7 years, we like to say it's a we program. It's not a me program. It's not an I program. It's a we program. We can do this together. Isolation is the enemy of healing. Isolation is the enemy of recovery. Isolation is the friend of mental insanity, if you will, right? You know, because if we're just alone all the time, we're sometimes alone with, as a friend of mine says, an idiot. Now, that's not who you really are, by the way. Who you really are is a child of God. And these churches really, as God sees them, are his family, God's family. And all sorts of us, all kinds of us, we're all a part of this big family of love and grace. But when we're isolated, we can get a little crazy. When we're together, if we rooted in love and grace and peace and in the redemptive work of Jesus, there's a beautiful, beautiful healing that can emerge together. And so we're called to walk this out. When Joanne Guy, who was one of the founders of this church, along with her daughter-in-law, Laura Guy, we had her funeral service a few weeks ago. And Laura Guy's son shared at the funeral service. And I feel like we should show that sometime. Like, it was so beautiful what he put together and shared as he grew up in this church, right? And the heart of the church was to reach people outside the church, this Living Water Church. And I just fell in love with that vision that Laura had in the early, early days. Her son at Joanne Guy's funeral shared one story where there was a heavy metal band coming through Kansas City, and they needed a place to stay. And guess where they ended up staying? At Joanne Guy's home, which was right over here. She had literally bought a home over here so that she could just be a hospitality person to people outside the church as they were trying to reach people. And so the heavy metal band spends the night at the guy's home and did they do a little concert here, Clifford, in the church? Right here in a Friday night service, heavy metal, Jesus music. Was it a Jesus heavy metal band or just, yeah?
The group was War of Ages.
War of Ages. But I just love that open, hospitable spirit about welcoming people in. All different types of people were brought together in love and peace and grace. Let's pray together. God, come do a work in our hearts today. Thank you that the Spirit of God is dwelling in us and among us. Thank you that your presence as we gather is in a special way where 2 or 3 are gathered in your name. You're here, your Spirit, your resurrected Spirit, this resurrected community of people of love and grace and peace and healing and recovery and redemption. We ask for your Spirit to move and work not only in us, but through us. And may we be mobile tabernacles of God's love and grace and peace everywhere we go. May we be people of love, healing, grace, mercy, forgiveness, beauty, artistic creativity. May the love of Christ compel us, move us, and be disseminated through us everywhere we go. We pray this in Jesus' name.